What if your child's meltdowns, focus problems, and emotional outbursts aren't a parenting problem or a discipline problem, but what if they're a breathing problem? So, today we are going to be talking about the connection to breathing and behavioral issues. So, if you're the mom who has tried every strategy, read every book, and still feels like she's failing or just feels like something is off, then this conversation is for you. Maybe you've already had the diagnosis of ADHD, but you just feel like something deeper is going on. I want you to listen and hear to this statistic because we know that children with sleep disordered breathing are 40 to 100% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD like symptoms as opposed to those children who are nasal breathing. And there's tons of studies out there. This is just one statistic. And a lot of the studies are pointing to before we jump to medications, before we jump to the diagnosis, and we're trying to just focus on addressing the behavior, let's take a look at the body. Let's see how the body's breathing, how the body's sleeping, how much oxygen they're getting at night, and we can see a direct effect to our children's behavior. And I think we all can relate to this, and it ties it back because how many times, as a mom, if you're a mom listening and watching this, you remember those newborn stages of really poor sleep. Yes. And how did we feel the next day when we got 2 hours of really crappy sleep? Horrible. We had low motivation. We couldn't focus. Our memory was bad. We were moody, emotional. At least I was. I remember that feeling. And that's what our children are going through. And by the time we get to the ADHD diagnosis, it's not just one night of bad sleep or 2 nights of bad sleep. It's days and months and years of bad sleep for our children. So why does this matter? We know we live in a world that jumps straight to behavioral interventions. In our traditional medicine, we like to jump to medicine. We're out here chasing the symptoms of what our children are dealing with, and those are relevant and those are important. But the interventions, the behavioral interventions, the labels, the medications, without ever asking, is this child's body getting enough oxygen? Is this child's body getting the proper sleep? Not just amount of sleep, but quality sleep. Are they getting the proper sleep stages of light, deep, and REM? Are we mouth breathing while we're sleeping? Do we have sleep disordered breathing? Are we snoring while we're sleeping? That is creating physiological changes and a state that makes our body in fight or flight mode, a dysregulated nervous system, instead of allowing for the body to rest and digest and heal and regulate itself. If we're asking the child's body to do all those things, but the physiological state that makes regulation nearly impossible, we're never going to see those symptoms go away. No matter the sticker charts, no matter the medication, we're still going to have that underlying root cause of what could be driving all of the behavior issues, or if not all of it, fueling fire to what is causing some of the behavioral issues going on. So maybe you're the mom who's been told your child has ADHD, but again, something just doesn't quite feel right. It just feels like there's just something off, that something more could be done instead of the medication or the label. And you watch your child fall apart every afternoon, can't figure out why. Your child sleeps all night long, and I hear this all the time. They're a great sleeper. They sleep, I put them to bed, they fall asleep, they sleep all night. So they're a great sleeper, but it's a child who wakes up exhausted, can't get enough sleep is what it seems like. And that's where we need to look at the quality of sleep. How much oxygen are they getting at night? Maybe you're the mom that you've tried the behavioral therapy, dietary changes, and you're running out of answers. And not to say none of those things aren't helpful, but when we're stacking that all on top of a broken foundation, it's going to be very difficult to get everything to last long term. So this isn't about blame or what we should try and shouldn't try. This is truly just about looking at what's going on underneath. So I don't want to undo all the work you've already done, whether it be sticker charts or the behavioral therapy. This is about taking a look at the foundation, and is there something off with your child at the foundation that could be the driving factor to all of these domino effects? And that is where everything starts to change. Because what we don't mostly realize a lot of the times is that behavior is communication, and sometimes that is what the body is trying to tell us. When our child's body is tired and it's moody and it's grumpy, it's communicating that it's not getting enough oxygen. It's communicating to us that I'm not getting quality sleep and I cannot regulate myself during the day. So I want us to take a look at these outside symptoms that we're seeing and really think, what could that symptom be trying to communicate to us about what could be going on deeper in my child's body? Because what happens when we're not getting enough oxygen, when we're mouth breathing, when we have sleep disorder breathing? What happens in the brain and the body when a child mouth breathes? Mouth breathes, it bypasses some of our most natural systems that our body has put in place. So it bypasses our nasal filtration system. It bypasses our humidifying system and our nitric oxide production system. So our bodies are designed very amazing ways, but when we don't use it how it's intended, we bypass all of these things that are supposed to be happening, and we see the results add up. So nitric oxide, oxygen, humidification, filtration. One of those words that you may not be familiar with is nitric oxide. And what it is and why it matters, it's a vasodilator. So it helps oxygen delivery to the brain and the rest of the body. And what we know is chronic mouth breathing equals, and we typically have chronically lower oxygen saturation. So we see the more mouth breathing, the less oxygen, the less nitric oxide, which leads to a brain running on less oxygen, which leads to a brain that is dysregulated, a brain that is tired, reactive, impulsive. And here's what we tend to expect. We expect children to regulate emotions. We expect them to hop out of bed and be ready to go to school that day. We expect them to be focused and ready to take on their homework, their schoolwork, and pay attention in class. And we're expecting all of that with a brain that is not getting what it needs to even have the ability to function at that level. So this is not a character flaw, and I like to talk about that often with parents, that poor sleep, it's not normal. It's not something your child was just born with. This is a physiological reality that your child is dealing with. And it is something that can be fixed from the ground up. So one of my most recent cases, her child was mouth breathing during the day, during the night, pretty much 100% mouth breathing. And when we turned that child into a nasal breather, we saw a huge improvement in behavior in that child. The mom said they felt like a completely different child. And that is how big these behavioral changes can be. And I don't want to sound dramatic, but it is dramatic. The shifts that we see when a child gets good breathing, good sleep, they do seem like completely different children. And I think we can relate to that. Again, if we go back to the analogy of when we get poor sleep, we're completely different moms. We're completely different human beings. And those shifts happen not by more sticker charts, but changing the physiological aspects of what's happening below. So the sleep piece, where does this come into play? We know the breathing piece. The sleep piece is why more sleep doesn't fix tired. We know a mouth breathing child is almost never getting restorative sleep. Sleep disorder breathing, where we have snoring, mouth breathing, restless sleep, night waking. We even see night sweats where they're waking up just really sweaty and they're really hot sleeper. We also see bedwetting connected to sleep disorder breathing. If we see all of these aspects, they're tossing, they're turning, their body is working really, really hard all night long. We're not getting restorative sleep. They're fighting for the oxygen. They're fighting for the regulation instead of just being able to rest and regulate on their own. So during sleep, the brain, we know it consolidates learning, regulates emotions, clears metabolic waste. It really resets everything. And that is why a child who is cycling through, and that is why a child who isn't cycling through proper sleep stages is starting every day in deficit. So this looks like a child who can't focus at school. This looks like a child who emotionally can't regulate and is explosive and can't take orders. And especially you see this grow into the afternoon. We see wired but tired. We see the wired but exhausted at bedtime. And that is because our kids are starting their day, instead of refreshed and rejuvenated, we're starting in a deficit. We're starting below optimal oxygen, optimal sleep quality. And so the behaviors that we see during the day are the costs of what's not happening in that nighttime restorative sleep. So that brings us to the ADHD overlap and why this matters. We know that research with sleep disorder breathing in children mimics or worsens ADHD-like symptoms. So inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity all overlap with symptoms of chronic sleep deprivation and low oxygen. There's actually studies where they take two groups of kids, and one group of kids has been diagnosed with ADHD. The other group has been diagnosed with sleep disorder breathing. They put them in a room, they look at their charts, they evaluate their symptoms, and they can't tell which kid has which diagnosis because they all look extremely similar. So just by looking at these children's lists of symptoms, they can't say this one has ADHD, this one has sleep disorder breathing. So we can see where the overlap is. Now, this does not mean that every child with ADHD has an airway problem, but it does mean that the airway should be evaluated before or alongside any behavioral or any assessment that's going to label and medicate our children. So if we know our children is mouth breathing and has sleep disorder breathing and also has all these other symptoms, let's treat the foundation either before or along with and see what happens if those symptoms get better. And what we know is some children's symptoms resolve or significantly improve when the airway is addressed. And sometimes, depending on the case, airway and muscle function support, sometimes it looks like myofunctional therapy. Sometimes it looks like myofunctional therapy along with structural changes like expansion and things like that. But we know that the baseline, the foundation of how our children breathe and sleep, it comes down to the muscles, and that is what myofunctional therapy really helps address. So the question isn't always either or. The question is, has the airway been ruled out? How is my child breathing? Is there anything underneath the surface that we might want to look at before we jump to the labels and the diagnosis and the medication? So this is where we start inside our practice with myofunctional therapy, is we start at the foundation. What is going on with the foundation of how your child is breathing, how they are sleeping, and can we improve that? Can we make that better? And if the answer is yes, then it's absolutely worth it to see, can we get rid of the symptoms altogether, or at least, again, stop adding fuel to the behavioral issues and symptoms that are already going on. So if this is sounding like your child, we're having the signs of behavior, focus, maybe even ADHD discussion is starting to come in, I really urge you, and I want to help you look at what's going on underneath the surface so that we can see long-term health changes and not just quick Band-Aid. So if this resonates with you, I have a link. You can join my free webinar. This is a really great place that starts to paint the picture of exactly what muscle dysfunction is, why it is so important, and that really talks you through what the next steps are. If you're wanting a in-person one-on-one, we can do that virtually over video, and we can get a full assessment on your kiddo. So you can find both of those links below wherever you're watching and listening to this. And I just want you to be curious. I want you to be curious about, if you're having these symptoms, are we missing something? And that's where it starts, is just to start asking more questions and more curiosity so that we can provide our children with a bigger and better future that aren't the short-term fixes that are the only options that you're being given today. So join me below for one of those two options, and we'll take this to the next level for your kiddos.